Hello, I'm glad you've chosen to join me as we take a look at Jesus' trial and sentencing in Mark 15. Last week we saw Jesus' trial before the religious council, if you could even call it a trial. But since the Jews had no authority under the Roman government to carry out a death sentence, they brought Jesus to Pilate to stand trial and be sentenced to death by crucifixion. Our story picks up in Mark chapter 15, starting in verse 1. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council, and they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." And the chief priests accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you." But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. Jesus did not defend himself against all of the charges levied by the Jewish leaders. He only confirmed that he was indeed the King of the Jews. Many false accusations had been levied towards Jesus, but he did not feel the need to defend himself. This amazed Pilate, since most people, even if they were not innocent, would at least try to defend themselves. And certainly people who are innocent would want to plead their case. However, Jesus was resigned to the fate that he was about to face, knowing that it was necessary to happen in order to save mankind from sin. Jesus' silence also fulfilled the things written about him in Isaiah 53, as was mentioned in last week's lesson with his original trial before the Jewish council. Now let's read verses 6 through 15. Now at the feast he used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked, and among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to them, "Then what shall I do with the man you call the King of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Pilate offered the people a choice for a prisoner to release: Jesus, an innocent man and a miracle worker, or Barabbas, a clearly guilty insurrectionist and murderer. The choice ought to have been clear as to who should have been released: Jesus. Yet the crowd chose the criminal, the rabble-rouser, the murderer. The religious leaders had persuaded the crowd to choose Barabbas over Jesus. They had used their influence for evil due to their envy of Jesus. Barabbas symbolically represents us. Jesus took the punishment that we deserved so that we could be set free and have a second chance at life. Pilate asked what should be done with Jesus, and the crowd shouts, "Crucify him." Pilate points out that he has done nothing deserving death by asking why. What evil has he done? Yet the people insist on Jesus being crucified. Pilate subtly tries to do things to get the people to turn from the evil of asking for Jesus to be crucified, yet they will not. Ultimately, he is not willing to go against the people, though he had the power to do so, as he was concerned probably about the potential fallout of opposing the people on this and was unwilling thus to take a stand. He tried to remain neutral, but in so doing, really sided against Jesus. We cannot try to remain neutral when it comes to standing up for Jesus. Pilate then had Jesus scourged, which is a horrific act in itself. History tells us the person was flogged either by two soldiers called lictors or by one soldier who would alternate positions. Under Hebrew law, a penalty was limited to 40 strokes, so they normally would stop at 39 in case they miscounted. However, the Romans had no such limitation. A scourging severity depended entirely on the lictor's disposition. The only rule for a lictor who scourged a man about to be crucified was that he was to expire on the cross, not at the stake. They would refer to scourging as the little death because the person was often scourged to within inches of his life. Usually the lictor would use a short-handled whip called a flagellum, with several single or braided thongs of variable length. Tied to these whips were usually pieces of bone, glass, stones, and other miscellaneous sharp objects that would cut into the skin. A person who was scourged was usually stripped down and would have his arms stretched out and tied off and would either be facing down on the ground or positioned standing. The lictor would then take the flagellum and begin to whip him, and the bones, glass, and other sharp objects would pierce into his skin and rip it into shreds. The victim would lose all consciousness to anything other than the burning pain as the cruel whip whistled and cut. Scourging was nearly as bad as the crucifixion itself. Jesus endured this for us because he loved us, and this was the only way in which God could be both just and the justifier of those who are saved by Jesus' sacrifice. For God to remain just, sin must be punished, and Jesus agreed to take on the punishment our sins deserve, which is death. This was only the beginning of the sacrifice Jesus was making for us out of love for all mankind. Next week, we will look at the events of the crucifixion itself, which Jesus endured for us. Hebrews 12 says, Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. He did this with joy, not because the event itself was joyful, but because of what his sacrifice meant for us, that we could be forgiven and have our relationship with God, which was destroyed through sin, restored. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son to die for us so we could be saved. If you'd like to know more about how to be saved, check out this video here, or you can check out this video here on another topic. As always, I hope you have a great week, and God be with you as you seek to do his will.